In a grand city where wealth was admired above all else, a young businessman named Kofi had everything: money, power, and influence. However, he had one problem: finding a woman who loved him for who he was, not for his wealth. Tired of encountering women who only sought riches, Kofi devised a plan. He would disguise himself as a humble driver to test a woman's true character. If she treated him with kindness despite his lowly appearance, he would know she was genuine. One day, Kofi's friend, Mr. Mensah, introduced him to a beautiful but arrogant lady named Oma. She was known for her love of luxury, expensive clothes, and grand parties. She believed that her future husband had to be wealthy, or he was of no use to her. Mr. Mensah, aware of Kofi's plan, told Oma that a rich suitor wanted to meet her. However, instead of meeting a well-dressed businessman, Oma was surprised when a dusty car arrived in front of her house, and a man in simple clothes stepped out. "This must be the driver," she muttered, frowning. "Miss Oma, I have been sent to pick you up," Kofi said humbly. Oma scoffed. "And where is the rich man I was promised?" "The master prefers to meet you at his mansion," Kofi replied, hiding his amusement. She rolled her eyes but got into the car, eager to meet the supposed rich suitor. She had no idea the real test had just begun. As Oma sat in the car, she looked around in disgust. "This car is so old and dirty," she muttered, wrinkling her nose. "Does your master have no taste?" Kofi smiled but said nothing. He simply focused on driving, carefully observing her attitude. Oma, unimpressed by the modest car and the driver's plain clothes, assumed the rich man she was about to meet was either careless or testing her patience. She decided she would only tolerate this poor driver until she met the real owner of the house. "Drive faster," she snapped. "I don't have all day." Kofi nodded and continued the journey. He had encountered many women like Oma, women who judged people based on their wealth, not their character. But he needed to see just how deep her arrogance went. As they neared the mansion, Oma suddenly sat up. Her eyes widened in surprise as the massive gates opened, revealing a breathtaking estate. It was the most luxurious mansion she had ever seen. Her heart skipped a beat. "So, this is the house of the rich suitor?" Kofi nodded. "Yes, Miss Oma." Oma's frown instantly disappeared, replaced by a bright smile. "Oh. I knew it," she said, adjusting her dress. "Only a man with great taste could live here. I hope he is as impressive as his house." Kofi parked the car and stepped out to open the door for her. Oma barely acknowledged him as she strutted toward the entrance, eager to meet the so-called wealthy man. Little did she know, she had already met him. As Oma entered the grand mansion, her excitement grew. She admired the crystal chandeliers, the golden decorations, and the lavish furniture. "This is what I deserve," she whispered to herself. She expected to be greeted by a handsome, well-dressed millionaire, but instead, the driver followed her inside. "Where is your master?" she asked impatiently. "He will meet you shortly," Kofi said. Oma sighed and sat on an expensive leather couch. "Bring me some juice. And hurry." Kofi nodded and walked to the kitchen. He returned with a glass of fresh juice and placed it gently on the table. Oma picked it up, took a sip, then frowned. "This isn't sweet enough. Is this how your master treats guests?" "Get me another one." Kofi obeyed without complaint. He continued to serve her throughout the evening, fulfilling every demand. As the night progressed, Oma continued treating him like a lowly servant. She made rude remarks, criticized his appearance, and even called him useless when he accidentally spilled a drop of water on the table. "This house is beautiful, but I hope your master is nothing like you," she sneered. Kofi simply smiled, already knowing how this story would end. The next morning, Oma awoke to a luxurious breakfast prepared for her. She felt like royalty, convinced that the mansion's owner would soon come to sweep her off her feet. After finishing her meal, she turned to Kofi. Tell your master I am ready to meet him. Kofi chuckled inwardly but remained calm. He is a busy man, but he will meet you soon. Oma huffed but decided to be patient. As the day passed, she strolled through the mansion, imagining herself as the lady of the house. She envisioned hosting grand parties, wearing expensive jewelry, and living in ultimate luxury. Yet, the master never arrived. The only person around was Kofi, the annoying driver. This is strange, she murmured. Why hasn't he appeared? She had no idea the real test was only beginning. Oma's desire for wealth grew stronger. She started treating Kofi a little better, hoping he could help her gain favor with his rich master. Kofi, she said sweetly, do you think your master will like me? Kofi smiled. I think he is looking for someone kind-hearted. Oma forced a laugh. Oh, I am the kindest person ever. Kofi simply nodded, amused by her act. She spent the next few days pretending to be polite, believing she would soon marry into wealth. But she was about to receive the biggest shock of her life. On the 7th night of Oma's stay, a grand dinner was arranged. She dressed in her finest gown, convinced she was about to meet her future husband. As she sat at the table, Kofi entered, wearing an expensive suit. Oma frowned in confusion. What are you doing here? Where is your master? Kofi smiled. Oma, I am the master. Oma's heart stopped. What? Kofi leaned forward. This house, this wealth, it all belongs to me. Oma's face turned pale. Oma stared at Kofi in disbelief. You? But you're just a driver. Kofi chuckled. I was never a driver. I disguised myself to test your character. Oma's hands trembled. But why? To see if you would treat people with kindness, no matter their status, Kofi said. But you failed. Oma's stomach twisted in shame. Oma lowered her head. I didn't know. Kofi shook his head. You judged me because you thought I was poor. Now, you see the truth. Tears welled in Oma's eyes. Please, forgive me. Kofi sighed. The lesson is already learned, Oma. Oma felt her world crumble. Kofi stood. Wealth fades, but character remains. I wanted someone who valued me for who I am, not my money. Oma sobbed. I was foolish. Kofi nodded. Yes, but now, you must decide who you want to be moving forward. Oma wiped her tears, realizing she had lost something far greater than riches. Oma left the mansion, reflecting on her mistakes. She vowed to change, to be a better person. Meanwhile, Kofi found love elsewhere, with a kind-hearted maid who had always treated him with respect, even when she thought he was just a driver. Oma walked away from the mansion with a heavy heart, replaying the night's events in her mind. She had lost her chance at wealth, but more than that, she had lost the respect of a good man. For the first time in her life, she questioned her values. Was money truly more important than character? Had she allowed greed to blind her? Determined to change, Oma returned home and decided to start fresh. She got a modest job at a small boutique and began treating people with respect. At first, it was difficult, humility did not come naturally to her. But as the days passed, she realized that kindness brought her more peace than riches ever could. One day, she saw an elderly woman struggling to carry a heavy basket. Without thinking, she rushed to help. The woman smiled warmly, thanking her. It was a small act, but it filled Oma with a sense of joy she had never felt before. Slowly, the people around her noticed a change. The same friends who once admired her for her beauty and status now saw something different, genuine kindness. But there was still one person she longed to prove her transformation to, Kofi. Would he ever believe she had truly changed? Months passed, and Oma continued on her journey of self-improvement. She no longer sought wealth but instead focused on becoming a better person. One day, fate brought her and Kofi together again. She had taken a job at a local restaurant as a waitress, serving people with grace and humility. As she carried a tray of food, she froze when she saw a familiar face, Kofi. He had come to dine at the restaurant with some business associates. Oma's heart pounded, but she took a deep breath and walked over to their table. "Good evening, sir. What would you like to order?" she asked politely, avoiding eye contact. Kofi looked up, clearly surprised to see her. Instead of arrogance, he saw humility in her eyes. She was different. "Oma," he asked. She nodded, forcing a smile. "Yes, sir." He studied her for a moment, then placed his order. Oma served them professionally, never once showing discomfort. Kofi observed her closely throughout the evening, impressed by the change in her demeanor. When he finished his meal, he left a generous tip and a note, "Meet me outside after your shift." Oma's hands trembled as she read it. Would he forgive her? After her shift, Oma stepped outside, finding Kofi waiting for her. He leaned against his car, arms crossed, watching her with curiosity. "I never expected to see you here," he said. Oma nodded. "Life has a way of humbling us." Kofi's eyes softened. "You've changed." She smiled sadly. "I had to. I was foolish before, but I've learned that wealth is meaningless without a good heart." Kofi was silent for a moment. "Why this job?" "I wanted to earn an honest living," she replied. "I wanted to understand what it means to work hard." He nodded, impressed. "And have you?" She chuckled. "Every day." Kofi smiled. "I'm glad to see you doing well, Oma." She hesitated before speaking. "I never got to say this, but I'm sorry for the way I treated you. I was blinded by greed, and I regret it deeply." Kofi studied her, then said, "I forgave you long ago." Oma felt a wave of relief wash over her. She hadn't expected his kindness, but it made her respect him even more. As they parted ways that night, Oma knew she had truly changed. As much as Oma had changed, Kofi had already found love elsewhere, with someone who had treated him kindly from the start. Ajoa, a maid in his mansion, had always been respectful and humble. Even when she thought Kofi was just a driver, she had shown him kindness. Kofi had watched her over time and realized that she was the kind of woman he wanted, someone who valued people for who they were, not what they owned. One evening, he took Ajoa on a walk through his garden. "I've seen your heart, Ajoa. You are kind, patient, and true." She blushed. "I only treat people the way I'd like to be treated." Kofi smiled. "And that's why I've fallen for you." Ajoa gasped. "Me?" He nodded. "True love isn't about wealth, it's about character." She hesitated, then smiled. "Then I am honored." Oma, hearing of their engagement later, felt no bitterness, only happiness that Kofi had found someone worthy of his heart. For the first time, she understood what true love really meant. Though Kofi and Ajoa were building a new life together, Oma was not left behind. Her transformation had given her a new purpose. She continued working hard, eventually saving enough to open a small clothing store. Instead of chasing riches, she focused on building a good name. One day, as she helped a young girl pick out a dress, she smiled, realizing she had found happiness in the simplest things. Her former friends, who once admired her for her beauty and status, had all disappeared when she lost her wealth. But now, she had new friends, people who valued her for her kindness and honesty. She had once believed that marrying a rich man would bring her happiness. Now, she knew better. Happiness wasn't found in wealth, it was found in character, in treating others well, and in being at peace with oneself. And that was a lesson she would never forget. Oma's story became well known in the town. People whispered about the proud woman who had once mocked a driver, only to discover he was the mansion's owner. But they also spoke of her transformation, how she had learned the value of humility and built a good life for herself. Many young women in the village took her story as a lesson. Some who once judged people by their wealth began to rethink their ways. Kofi and Ajoa lived happily, building a home filled with love and respect. And Oma, though she never married a rich man, found something far more valuable, self-respect and a heart full of kindness. The elders of the town often repeated the moral of the story. True wealth is not in money but in character. A person's worth is measured not by their riches, but by how they treat others, whether rich or poor. And so, Omo's story became a lesson passed down for generations, teaching that kindness and humility will always lead to true happiness.